Q&A. Hello, my name is Mark Deets. I'm an assistant professor of African and World History here at AUC. I work in the history department, and I'm also, I have the privilege of serving as the director of the Al-Walid Center for American Studies and Research here at AUC. And the Center for American Studies and Research, otherwise known as CASAR, was established in 2003 by Prince Al-Walid of the Saudi royal family after the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001, in order to build cultural understanding between the United States and the Middle East. And so he established 6 different study centers at that time, one here, and one at AUB in Beirut in the Middle East. And then he also established 2 in the UK, one at Cambridge and another one at Edinburgh. And then he established 2 in the United States, one at Harvard and one at Georgetown University. So anyway, it's my privilege to be associated with this center, and I have to say that most of the good things that happen in our center happen because of that woman over there on my left, Yasmin, who's my assistant and adjunct professor and really makes the center tick. Today it's my privilege to introduce Adjunct Professor El-Hadidi, who is teaching American Studies 2190, Is America Still a Superpower? This is the course that Alaa teaches here at AUC. Alaa is a retired Egyptian diplomat and former ambassador to Turkey, Russia, and Romania. He is currently an adjunct professor of international relations at the American University in Cairo. He has an extensive background of over 30 years in foreign policy research and writing. From 2006 to 2007, he served as a spokesperson for the Egyptian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. From 2007 to 2010, he was the Egyptian ambassador to Turkey. From 2010 to 2012, he was the Egyptian ambassador to Russia, Turkmenistan, and Tajikistan. And then from 2012 to 2013, he was the spokesperson for the Egyptian Prime Minister. He was the director of the Institute for Diplomatic Studies in Cairo. Afterwards, he was appointed to be Egypt's ambassador to Romania. In addition, he has notably held diplomatic assignments in different Egyptian cabinets of foreign ministers and Egypt's embassies in the United States and in Jordan. Ambassador El-Hadidi got his bachelor's degree in political science from the American University in Cairo and his PhD in political science from the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. He was also a fellow at the Center for International Studies at Harvard University. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome, join me in welcoming Ambassador and Professor Alaa El-Hadidi.
Thank you, Mark, very much for the introduction. Can you all hear me? Okay, just before I start, I just want to make sure. Yeah. This one. Okay. Let me. As we all remember, during the campaign of Donald Trump, he said that he will end the war in Ukraine in just 24 hours. And there is some debate about whether these 24 hours will be before he took office or after he took office. Okay, let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say that he said he's going to end the war after he took office. Now, as you all know, he took office on the 20th of January, and now it's almost 3 weeks, and the war didn't end. And actually, it's okay. So it's now 3 weeks since he took office on the 20th of January. And actually, after 2 weeks, it will be exactly 3 years since the start of the war on the 24th of February, 2022. And the latest coming out of Washington, at least the one I've been following, is that the administration, in the form of Keith Kellogg, we were going to speak about him in a minute or two, who's been appointed as a special representative of Trump for the war in Ukraine, said that it will take 100 days to conclude a deal. So from 24 hours to 100 days. Now, okay, let's go back a little bit in history. Let's go back to the 24th of February 3 years ago, when Vladimir Putin, and I'm sure all of you know who is Vladimir Putin, started the war, which he calls special operation, special military operation. And we're not going to enter into the details of how the war progressed, but as it stands at the moment, this is a map which shows where the Russian forces are controlling from the Ukrainian territory at the moment. Now, I've read some people saying that this is 18% of the Ukrainian territory. Some people say it's 20%, whatever. Let's just for the sake of argument say that it's 20%. It's easy to remember that figure. So at the moment, after almost 3 years, Russian forces control 20% of the Ukrainian territory. And can we have the other? This is also maybe, I don't know, from your side, it's more visible than from my side. As you can see, it is mostly, we are speaking about 4 provinces or oblasts. They call it oblast, just for the sake of understanding. An oblast is almost like a province, okay? So we are speaking about 4 provinces, and we're speaking about Crimea, the peninsula of Crimea. 1 minute. Okay, so it's very important to keep that map in mind, because we are going to speak about it in more details later. We are speaking about 4 provinces and Crimea. Okay, got it? Now, on the other side, you see that red dot on your left side. Okay, now as you can imagine, this is the map of all of Russia. And this red dot is a Russian oblast or province called Kursk. Am I pronouncing it right? Kursk, okay. Now, the Ukrainian forces on the 6th of August last year made an incursion on Russian territory and seized something like 1,000 square kilometers of this oblast, of this province, Kursk. Now they have lost, of the 1,000 kilometers which they have gained in the first days of their incursion, they have lost almost half of that territory, if not more. So let's say out of the 1,000 kilometers they were able to take control of about a year, not a year ago, from August last year. Gradually, the Russians were able, or Russia was able to regain back something like 600 kilometers out of the 1,000 kilometers. And if you follow the news, last Thursday, the Ukrainian forces waged a new offensive in this area and tried to regain back some of the territory which it had lost during the past few months. And this is very, very important to notice, because this is the first time Russia would be invaded since World War II. And for the Ukrainians, their aim was twofold. One is to distract as many Russian forces as possible from fighting inside Ukraine to defending their own territory, and at the same time changing the narrative that Ukraine was losing. Now, this is very important that the Ukrainians are planning, hoping to maintain as long as possible their hold on whatever square kilometers they are controlling at the moment. So even if they lose another 100 kilometers, or they gain several few kilometers, as they claim they have done since last Thursday, this is for the Ukrainians like a bargaining chip. And we'll see how that will play when we speak about the negotiations which are going to happen. Okay, so we have the 4 oblasts which are controlled by, the 4 Ukrainian oblasts which are controlled by Russia, and then we have the part of the Kursk Oblast which is controlled by Ukraine. Okay? Now, this is the guy I mentioned at the beginning, Keith Kellogg, who is a retired general, and he's 80 years old. In all the articles I read about him, they always mention he's 80 years old. I don't know why, but I mean, as if that is a stigma or whatever. Anyway, so this 80 years old retired general published an article in April last year in what is called the America First Policy Institute, one of the think tanks. Of course, in the States, you have a lot of think tanks. Some of them are very prominent, some of them are lesser known. But he published this article about his vision how to end the war in Ukraine. And it seems that either Trump himself or somebody from his aides pinpointed to him that, look, Keith Kellogg has a plan for ending the war, a peace plan, and Keith Kellogg also served as the national security advisor to Mike Pence, the vice president of Donald Trump in his first administration. So the guy is not unfamiliar to Trump. The guy is not unfamiliar to Trump's circles. And now they felt that it's opportune for them or beneficial for them to use him and to deploy him one way or the other and make use of him and his peace plan. And this is the most elaborate peace plan we know about the intentions of the administration. Nobody knows exactly officially what the peace plan is. Actually, it's mere speculation built on this article I mentioned. And then if this lecture would have been next week, not this week, not now, we would have had more details, because next week we have what's called the Munich Security Conference, which happens every year. I don't know how many of you know or heard of the Munich Security Conference, and just one person is nodding, and the others are not. Anyway, the Munich Security Conference is like the geostrategic conference which happens every year in the city of Munich, where you have a lot of diplomats, decision makers. It's the equivalent, usually people compare to Davos, the economic conference of Davos, which is much more famous. So the Munich conference is the security conference, and it is said or rumored that Keith Kellogg in this conference will present more details about his plan to end the war in Ukraine. So if I were you, and if you're interested in what's happening or what's going to happen, you should follow what is going to happen next week. And then on the 20th of February, after presenting the elements of his peace plan to the Munich conference, he is going to go to Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, and sit with Zelensky and present his peace plan. Now, let us see together what his peace plan is built on. Actually, can we go back to... Can we go back? Yeah. Okay. Okay, the peace plan simply is built on several principles. The first one is that the fighting should stop where the Russian forces are at the moment. So you see where Russia is, you see where the Russian forces are. Okay, the fighting should stop here. They should freeze the front line. So the front line becomes like a ceasefire line, to put it in a very simple terms. So this is the first element of his proposal. You have a front, you freeze that front, everybody stops, the Russians will not cross that line, and the Ukrainians should not cross that line. Okay? Now, when he put this argument, at that time, the Ukrainians hadn't invaded or entered into Russian territory. So it doesn't speak about Kursk, but at least we know what's the thinking of this guy is. So the first element is that you freeze the front line, and it becomes a kind of like a ceasefire. Now, later on, it was developed, and he suggested, or somebody suggested, that the Ukrainians should return back to Russia the land they occupied or they control in Kursk in exchange of the Russians giving back the nuclear power plant of Zaporozhye. I don't know how many of you know what's the nuclear power plant of Zaporozhye. You all know what's the nuclear power plant. Okay, this is the second largest plant, nuclear plant in Europe. And a lot of electricity is generated, and the Ukrainian national grid depends, I don't know what percentage, but it's quite obvious, quite a large percentage, depends on this nuclear plant. So there's kind of like a swap. Okay, the Ukrainians withdraw from Russian territory, and the Russians would return back to the Ukrainians this power plant. Okay, so the Ukrainians would feel that they have enough electricity. Now, the third element of his proposal, of course, is Ukraine will abandon, at least for the next 2 or 3 decades, the notion of entering or becoming a member of NATO, which is one of the major reasons why Russia or Putin invaded Ukraine. Because one of the major demands of Ukraine, one of the major, let's say, slogans of even Zelensky, which is raised during his election, his own election, was that Ukraine should join NATO. Now he's saying that, of course, Trump behind him or with him, Ukraine should drop that demand, should forget about joining NATO, but, and that but is extremely important, he said that Ukraine can join the European Union. Now, it sounds that, okay, you're exchanging this for that. Okay, you drop NATO, but you're allowed to join European Union. The problem with this proposal of joining the European Union is that despite the fact that the European Union is not NATO, European Union is more of an economic regional organization, while NATO is a military alliance. But in the European Union, there is a clause, or there is a chapter, or whatever you want to call it, which speaks about defense. There is a defense pact among members of the. Now, in the past, the European Union in general did not pay much attention to this aspect of the European Union because they depended on NATO. In the past couple of years, when Trump started speaking about pulling out of NATO or putting demands on NATO, many European leaders started paying attention once more to this clause about mutual defense. So, in a sense, he's saying that, look, Ukraine, you cannot join NATO, but if you want to maintain a kind of, or guarantee flow of weapons security, you can do it through the European Union. But for at least the majority of the people, when he says joining the European Union, they do not concentrate, or they do not not concentrate, they do not notice this part of the defense. And he also mentioned that Ukraine can join the European Union by the year 2030. So he's giving some space for Russia that, look, Ukraine is not going to be armed or anything before 2030, although this arm will come from the EU, not from NATO. And NATO, of course, at least 2 or 3 decades. The last aspect of his plan, which is why I'm showing you this map, is that this front line, which is about 800 miles long, 800 miles, should become a buffer zone. And here where, as they say, the devil is in the details. Who is going to man this buffer zone? How wide is this buffer zone going to be? Is it going to be on the Ukrainian side or on the Russian side or on both? How stretched it's going to be? And for the Ukrainians, they want, of course, the buffer zone to be guarded by international peacekeepers, mainly, it doesn't come as a surprise, Europeans, and finally also Americans. That you will have American troops, you'll have British troops, you'll have French troops, German troops on this border line, which is not like yani, putting troops at large. It's not like joining, but they are peacekeepers. And the idea is to emulate what is being done in Korea, between North and South Korea. You have the demilitarized zone between North and South, and you have American troops there. Now, not necessarily the 60,000 American troops who are in Korea, but at least some American troops, with some British, some French. Now, this is the, let's say, not the original plan. This is, let's say, the starting point. This is where Keith Kellogg thinks that it should be a starting point for negotiations. This is, I mean, the preliminary draft. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, Zelensky, all of you know who is Zelensky. I mean, he is saying, okay, he accepts that, but we should have American troops. And it seems that the administration hasn't had a firm opinion about that. They agree in principle to European troops, but when it comes to American troops, I don't think they will agree to it, but at least that is the initial proposal, and that is the initial discussion. Now, we go back to the person who is going to deal with this peace plan. Now, in my humble opinion, everybody is concentrating and arguing and focusing on the American peace plan, what Zelensky wants, but nobody's asking, what does Russia want? What does Putin want? What are the red lines for Putin? What are the red lines for Russia? I mean, Russia entered the war to not allow NATO forces to be in Ukraine in the first place. So let's go back. Let's go back to three incidents to explain Russian mindset, to explain how Russia sees the whole thing. I explained to some extent the American point of view, the Ukrainian point of view. Now let's see what the Russians are saying. I want to go back to the year 2007, when Putin went to the Munich Security Conference in 2007 and gave his famous speech about the role of Russia. And he said a phrase which at that time, not many people gave it the importance they are giving it today, which is that the collapse of the Soviet Union is the biggest geopolitical catastrophe which happened in the 20th century. Now, some people now remember this speech in 2007, remember this phrase, and stipulate from it that Putin, rightly or wrongly, wants to restore back the Soviet Union. Okay? You have a question, or? I can't hear you. Okay. Yeah. I'm telling you the reaction. I'm telling you how they see it in the West. Okay, I totally agree with what you said. I mean, definitely Putin does not want to restore the Soviet Union as it was, you know, until 1991. But at least in the mind of the West, they didn't pay attention at that time And now they are saying, he wants to restore back the Soviet Union. Okay? Now, the other thing I want you to remember is an article written by Putin in the dates in July 2021. He, as far as I know, maybe this is the only article published by Putin. You might correct me. But anyway, this is an article which was published by Putin, in which the title itself will give you an indication of how Putin and how the Russian elite, or the governing Russian elite at the moment, sees Ukraine. The title of the article is On the Historical Unity of Russians and Ukrainians. Now, as you can see, the title in itself, without need to read the whole article, I read it, of course, translated in Arabic, is that he does not believe in a separate Ukraine. He believes that Ukraine and Russia are one country. Okay? So for him to have an independent, separate Ukraine is not a viable option, is not something to be accepted. This is the second thing I want you to remember and have in mind. The third point I want to make in understanding the mindset of Putin and the governing elite in Russia is a memo presented to the Americans and to the West on 17th of December 2021. This memo, which was rejected out of hand, which the West did not take seriously, now they're going back to it. This memo is speaking about what? Speaking about NATO expansion. NATO, during the Cold War, as you can see from this map, see the western part of Europe, the countries in blue are NATO countries. The countries in red were what was until the collapse of until 1998 was considered what was called the Warsaw Pact, Eastern Europe. For simplicity, let's say this is Western Europe and you have Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe were members of what was called the Warsaw Pact, were in direct alliance with Russia, and Russian forces were there, and then when Mikhail Gorbachev took office, he withdrew the Russian forces from Eastern Europe in what became or led to afterwards to the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now, it's very, very important to remember that these countries which are red, which used to be under the domain or under the sphere, in the sphere of influence of the Russia, after 1991, unfortunately, I don't have, this is the only map I could find. They became actually blue. As you can see, all of the countries which were part of Eastern Europe, or most of the countries, not all of the countries, most of the countries of Eastern Europe, which were part of NATO, which were under the Russian influence, which were part of the Russian sphere of influence, have joined NATO. So now, all these countries, and you can see Romania, Poland, the Baltic states, Finland and Sweden, but Hungary, Slovakia, Czechia, all these countries which were part of Warsaw, which were under direct influence of Russia, they became part of NATO. And the memo of 17th of December 2021 asked or demanded from the Americans, from NATO, that all NATO forces which were deployed in these countries, in the eastern part, in the countries who joined NATO since 1997, to be withdrawn. And that means that these countries, Romania, Poland, Czech, Hungary, who has at the moment NATO troops, NATO weapons, according to the Russian demand, these troops and these weapons should return back to Western Europe, and these countries would revert back to their status before 1997. And in my humble opinion, this is the real problem. This is the crux of the conflict. It's not Ukraine, or Ukraine is only just the opening door. Ukraine is only just part of the problem. It symbolizes the problem, but actually we are speaking about NATO expansion. The West does not want to speak about NATO expansion. The West, of course, the Americans in December, just one day after presenting the Russian memorandum, rejected this Russian memorandum out of hand. And everybody in the West, as far as I remember, as far as I read, said that this was a kind of a maximalist demand by Russia. This is just a bargaining position, and he did not take it seriously. And because of that, we had the 24th of February invasion. Now, what does that mean? That means that Putin is thinking in terms of geopolitics. Putin wants a new Yalta. You know what's Yalta? This is the conference by the end of World War II in which the three leaders of Russia, America, and the United Kingdom sat together to divide what was going to be free Europe after the defeat of Germany and Italy. The division of Europe to spheres of influence. That's what Putin has in mind. That's what Putin wants. He wants not to speak about Ukraine. He wants to speak about Europe. He wants to speak about the position of NATO in Europe. He wants to divide Europe into spheres of influence and to be recognized as a superpower, to be recognized that he has a legitimate sphere of influence which should be respected, and that the Americans will have their sphere of influence the rest of the European. That is how Putin, in my opinion, thinks and wants. He's thinking in terms of geopolitics. On the other side, we have an American president who thinks in terms of business, who thinks in terms of deals, who thinks is a transaction. He does not think in terms of geopolitics, or at least that's not what he says. His idea is that the Russians, they are suffering economically. He said it publicly. And as a businessman, the most important thing is the economy. So if the Russians are suffering economically, then they will be in dire need of reaching a deal. Now, the Ukrainians are getting weapons, but they are getting weapons freely. And there's nothing free in this world, according to Trump. There's no free lunch. It's always going to be a kind of an exchange. Okay, I'm going to give you weapons. What are you going to give me in exchange of these weapons I'm going to give you? And it has been an idea being floated about 5-6 days ago. Every day I have to update this presentation, so I'll never forgive you. And Trump started saying that, okay, we will continue support to Ukraine, but we'll let Ukraine pay for the $80 billion they got freely, and whatever weapons we are going to give them in the future, in exchange of we, America, get control of the resources of Ukraine. Ukraine is very, very rich in oil and gas, very, very rich in lithium, very, very rich in rare earth minerals. And if you follow what's happening today between China on one side and the United States, and the battle over who's going to control the rare earth minerals, and if you can get hold of the rare earth minerals of Ukraine, it's a boon and a boost for the United States in its competition with China. So for him, this is a good bargain. So Trump is looking for a bargain. Trump is looking for a deal based on economics. I'll give you something, you give me something in exchange. I will let you, Russia, keep the 4 provinces, and in exchange of that, I will lift the sanctions. I will force the Ukrainians to make a peace deal with you. Now, it remains to be seen whether geopolitics or business will prevail. Most probably, if they reach an agreement, if, and I put under if, there's too many lines, then we will see. But, and I want to conclude my remarks. In my humble opinion, Russia is not going to enter into any deal or any serious negotiations before achieving 2 things. First, taking out the remaining Ukrainian troops from what is left of Kursk, what is left of land. Okay, it shrank from 1,000 kilometers to 400 kilometers, but it will take whatever it takes. I cannot imagine Putin sitting with Americans, he will not sit with the Ukrainians, and arguing or negotiating a peace deal while still some part of his country is occupied by the Ukrainians. So first of all, he must get rid of the Ukrainians who are in part of his country. Kick them out of Kursk. It will take 1 week, 1 month, I don't know how long. This is the first thing. The second thing, can we go back to the okay. Remember the 4 oblasts? Unfortunately, I wanted to bring a map, but when it comes to the computer and the internet, I always need help, and nobody wants to help me, I don't know why. The 4 oblasts, the Russian forces have taken control of only 85% of these 4 oblasts. Russian forces have not taken control of the full administrative boundaries of these 4 oblasts. And Putin has introduced in the Russian constitution that the four oblasts are now part of the Russian Federation. So he still has to finish the job. He still has to complete the job. Now, in the four oblasts, maybe two of them, he is already in control of 95% of the land of this oblast. But the other two, Zaporizhia and Kharkiv, they I think, control between 75 and 80% of the oblast. So once he takes full control of the four oblasts, he'll be ready to talk. So he has two things to fulfill before he starts negotiating. And that is why Trump is in a state of shock that Putin is not rushing to enter negotiations as he expected. Because Trump always thinks in terms of business. He does not understand why it's so important from a Russian point of view to have the full control over the land which Russians consider it Russian land. It's like, for them, it's liberating the land which is being occupied by Ukraine. And that's why Trump started speaking about imposing sanctions on Russia to force Russia to come to the negotiating table. And the irony is that during the campaign, everybody was speaking about Trump forcing Zelensky to come to the negotiating table, and now they're speaking about Trump trying to force Putin to come to the negotiating table. Okay, I hope we have time. I hope we have time for questions, if you do have any questions. And thank you for being patient with me.
Well,
Hello. Can you actually hear me? Does it work?
yeah, we hear you.
Okay, I have a question when it comes to Putin's war aims. I understand that he wants to maintain a sphere of influence across Eastern Europe, but it feels a bit unrealistic for it to go back to with the Warsaw Pact days, where it was all the way to East Germany. So what do you realistically think are Putin's maximalist war aims, and what he would settle for? Because right now he has Kherson and Zaporizhia. He doesn't even fully control them, and it might not even be realistic to fully control these two. How far do you think he actually wants to go, and what would be the minimum he would settle for?
Quite frankly, I do not know. Now, depending on Western sources, and here I emphasize the term Western, the Russian economy is in such a dire situation that Putin will be more than grateful to reach a deal as quickly as possible. This is the Western calculation. Now, I beg to differ. Even if the Russian economy is in a bad situation, I go back to my argument that we are speaking about geopolitics, not about just the economy. The economy is only one element in the calculation, and not everything is calculated according to how much profit you make. Point number one. Point number two, also the West is making a lot of noise about the rate of Russian casualties. Some estimates speak about 5,000, 4,000, 10,000, per month being killed, and there is shortage of Russian fighting soldiers. That's why they introduced soldiers from North Korea, blah, blah, blah. Also, this, I think, is a miscalculation. It's maybe part of the propaganda war, because First of all, historically speaking, the Russians are known to be able always to absorb heavy casualties. And if they, which in the West they do not understand, if they see these parts of Ukraine as Russian, then they are fighting for Mother Russia and not conquering another alien country. Now, definitely Putin, after so many sacrifices, definitely he will not just will not be just satisfied by reaching a ceasefire in Ukraine, even if he gets full control of the four oblasts and gets the Ukrainian out of Kursk. Definitely he's going to try to reach some kind of understanding concerning the American and NATO forces in Eastern Europe. Last year, there was a military base opened in Poland, and the Russians were furious about it. I'm not saying that this base is going to be closed, but if the West, and I would say that now under Trump, it's more likely than if it was still under Biden, that the West will try to reach some kind of accommodation, not fully accept the memo of 17th of December, but at least they will degrade some of the forces in Eastern Europe. They will try to accommodate Russia as far as possible. Taking into consideration the background that Trump does not believe in NATO. Trump also, does not have any problem in withdrawing American forces from NATO. So this will put pressure inside NATO to accept some of the demands by Putin. Okay?
Putin has also talked about
Raise your voice, the microphone.
like this. Putin has also talked about regime change in Ukraine, where he doesn't see Zelensky as a legitimate president and doesn't want to go with negotiations with him because of that. Like this? Okay, okay. I was going to say, there's the talk also about regime change in Ukraine, where Putin doesn't see Zelensky as a legitimate president to even go to negotiations with. Would that complicate negotiations? Would he even want to negotiate with Ukraine when Zelensky still didn't do elections, or how would that work? Oops.
Okay, there are a lot of details, and like any somebody who's following this story, I have a lot of information and I can speak for at least 3 hours continuously and put you all not to sleep, but it will be the end of your study here at AUC. But one element is that Putin does not believe that, first of all, as I mentioned in the article, that Ukraine is a separate country. It is part of Russia. And here we have to go back, not very distant past. We're not going to go to the Kievan Rus and the origins of the Russians, but we go back to World War II and how Ukraine is composed in terms of society. For very simplistic explanation, and not to get things more complicated, let's say that some of the eastern part of Ukraine, they're Russian speaking. Or if they're not completely Russian speaking, they have the dual linguistic level. So they speak Russian and they speak Ukrainian. But the western part, they're all Ukrainian speaking, and there are at least the majority, the vast majority are Ukrainian speaking, not Russian. And if you follow Ukrainian politics, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there is always like an infighting between the eastern part and the western part of Ukraine, the Russian-speaking part, or Russian-Ukrainian speaking part, and the Ukrainian part. And as I mentioned, in World War II, the western part of Ukraine, some estimates say about 2 million, joined Germany in invading Russia. And that's why when Putin says this is a Nazi regime, he's going back to World War II and reviving the kind of atmosphere and slogans of World War II. And despite the fact that Ukraine, Zelensky and his party, who are based from the West, of course, disclaim that, and they say they are not Nazis. But in the mind of Putin, based on the experience of Russia in World War II with the Ukrainians, especially the western part, then they are Nazis. And the whole mindset is that if you label them as Nazis, then how you would sit and talk to them, as you said. So it has been said that one of the aims of the initial Russian invasion in February 2022, that if the Russian forces would have reached Kiev, they would have implemented a regime change and they would have installed a new government. Now that is not possible, of course. But one of the interesting things about the peace plan presented by the Americans is that they are saying after reaching a ceasefire, we will have elections in Ukraine. I think this will be the opening to either elect a new leadership in Kiev, which in that case, then the Russians can sit with and negotiate for further things, or if, let's say, Zelensky is re-elected, then there will be negotiations, but not directly between both of them. Okay?
Okay, maybe one more, and then we're going to have to get going.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, so I have a question regarding the EU, kind of this plan for future rather than NATO to include Ukraine in the EU. How do even like European countries, are they ready, or are they kind of waiting for Ukraine to be included in the European Union? Do they agree with this plan? Because it is even like, it was a big discussion rather whether Turkey will be included like some period ago, but Ukraine also with several kind of criteria for a country to be included in the European Union. Is it possible, or how they react to this? Thank you.
Okay, when it comes to the EU and Turkey, it's a completely different dynamics than EU with Ukraine. Turkey is a Muslim country, is a completely different value system. It's not regarded as European. Yeah, Turkey clings to be European because of this slip of land in Europe, but mostly it's in Asia. And especially after Erdogan coming to power and being an Islamist and raising, so Turkey is a lost case. When it comes to Ukraine, it's little bit, not little bit, quite different. It's of course a Christian country. It's white, unfortunately. Unfortunately to label that, but it's a fact. And it's, in the eyes of many Europeans, it's fighting the battle of Europe against, of democracy against dictatorship, against Russian expansionism, blah, blah, blah. But, and everything you have a but in it. Europeans are divided on whether to really, how far they would go in accommodating Ukraine. Of course, when you speak about Poland, you speak about the Baltic countries. They do not only want Ukraine to join EU, they wanted to join NATO today, even yesterday, before today. So for Poland, Baltic countries, they take the very extreme point of view, to lesser extent Romania, but it's in that category. You know, when you speak about France, when you speak about Germany, they have reservations. They have deep reservations about Ukraine, not only joining NATO, but also joining the EU. Either or whether for not antagonizing Russia, or they say that Ukraine is not yet ready to join the EU because it needs to democratize more. Its society is not well equipped to join EU and things like that. When it comes to faraway country like, let's say, Spain, yeah, let's see Ukraine join the EU. Now, the interesting thing is a country which is called the United Kingdom. Now, the United Kingdom, despite the fact that it is far away geographically and it's not on the border, yet it takes the same positions of Poland and the Baltic states. And despite the fact that it has gone out of EU, but definitely it encourages Ukraine to join the EU. How it's going to play in the next few months or few years, it all depends on the results of the elections we are going to have, whether in France, whether in Germany, the next week. I mean, there's a lot of changes which are going to happen and which makes it for somebody like me very interesting to follow.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking once again Dr. El-Hadidi for speaking to us today. Please pay attention to, we have more CASAR events coming up this September, so please keep your eyes open. See some familiar faces. It's good to see you again. And yeah, what is our next event, Yasmin? Okay. Yeah, so that should be interesting. On the 27th from LaSalle University in Philadelphia, Dr. Charles Gallagher will be here to talk about race in America. See you. Yeah, so there'll be a lecture here on the 26th and a downtown lecture in the evening on the 27th. Thanks again. Have a great day.